The fire apparatus has modems in the vehicles. The city would no longer need to provide the internet access or the network access if the county took over. So those drop out immediately. Then there's some contracts for other items that would drop off over time. The city leases its laptops and desktop computers. So at the end of that contract, they will drop off. They also lease copiers. So at the end of that contract, it would drop off, and those type of items. But generally, the rest of the the information technology department would service the remaining departments. The information technology equipment replacement not only has items specifically for the fire department, they also replace or put aside funding for the replacement of equipment that serves the entire city. The telephone switch, for example, or the network equipment or servers, that kind of thing, benefits the whole city, so those costs aren't going to go away. Emergency communications operations. Don't expect those operations to be reduced. Although the county would be the one dispatching fire units, our dispatch center would still have to take a 911 call. For example, if you needed to call 911, you're not going to call 911 for police services and 912 for fire services. You're going to call 911 and identify your emergency. There still has to be a dispatcher to take that. The length of the call will be shortened. It'll be transferred over to the county, but we don't expect those operations to decrease. Emergency communications replacement equipment, that is generally for the replacement of radios and other communications equipment. That type of equipment is something that would be county provided if our fire services were with the county. So that is not in our calculation of what would remain. Major facilities repair, as you can see, it's a very small dollar amount. So we are assuming that would be eliminated. Again, we're back to the county proposal talking about how they'll maintain the stations, but only to a certain dollar limit. So as we got into actually doing it, this one might change if it turns out those costs exceed the cap the county would pay. City facility sewer fee. So we bill our departments and our funds just as if they were an institutional rate recipient of the sewer services. So I would certainly anticipate that instead of that being absorbed, we would actually bill the county for that. Overhead, that one, just for the size of the slide, I consolidated all here, but it consists of overhead charges for many departments. So any department that provides services to the fire department is part of an overhead allocation charge. So our city clerk, city treasurer, city manager functions, we really don't expect those to decrease, especially since a couple of those are like two people departments. We have our Human Resources Department. So that Human Resources does actually spend some hard dollars on serving the fire department. So there's recruiting costs. There is tuition reimbursement that's provided for in the MOU, and that is maintained in the Human Resources Department budget, so that would go away. So they have a bit of reduced costs there that would go away if the fire services were transferred to the county, but the majority, the staffing of the Human Resources Department and whatnot would still remain with the city and be dispersed elsewhere. Financial services, so provide a lot of functions for the fire department. Those functions are provided for all departments and are typically handled by one person in our financial services department. So those costs we don't expect to go away. And lastly, the charge, the overhead allocation charge that's built into the fire department budget is for fire administration. So that is calculated primarily for the purpose of knowing what each division within the fire department costs. Then when we set fees where those divisions are providing services to the public, we can capture the full cost. So if the fire department went to the county, so would the fire administration, so that charge would be eliminated. So we've got a total there. One of the other items to consider is in the fiscal impact is lost revenue. So the county proposal breaks revenue into two different types. So fire prevention fees, they would primarily still remit those to the city, and they would keep 5%. So we're talking a lost revenue of just $32,000 there. The other revenues, such as such as strike teams, grant revenue, and standby fees. Those the county will be keeping all of the revenue for that. So we have another $100,000 there that would be lost. The one that would have to be determined on what happens with it is $400,000 of advanced life support pass-through revenue that the city currently receives. And since we were unsure, we did not include that in the calculation as lost revenue. So at this point, we're saying that the city would still keep that revenue. So we take all those pieces and come up with an adjusted cost that we can use in comparison of $16,958,008 by taking the fire department budget that we looked at, the operating expenses other than overhead that the city would continue to retain, internal service fund allocations, those that would be retained, and then the lost revenue. So then we can compare that adjusted city cost to the county's option B proposal, and for 1920 that gives us a cost to the city of $3 million. So then to address your question of projections. We did a 10-year projection looking at what the city adjusted cost, the city adjusted costs would be, and what the county proposal. So the two primary drivers in projecting the city's adjusted cost were the assumptions that we had in the general fund financial forecast that was presented with the budget, and then the CalPERS amortization schedule for the unfunded liability. So other things that were looked at, we kind of talked about them as we went through the internal service funds. When insurance claims would drop off, which reminds me, I forgot to talk about workers' comp, that internal service fund charge. So we have workers' comp premiums. That is based on the salaries we pay, so that would not be a cost the city would retain. Claims, those are settled so slowly and they come in so slowly that we are not projecting those to drop off at all. Any new claims, of course, that employees filed while they were employees of the county, those of course would become county, but these are all that are related to their time spent here with the city. Then on the county side, for projecting that amount, use the formula given in the proposal and made the assumption, because we have no history at all to make any other assumption, that the actual increases matched the payment caps. So that gave us increases starting at 5.5% and going up to about 7.6%. So the final calculations show additional city costs with county's option B proposal in fiscal year 18-19 of 1.7 million, an additional cost of 3.2 million in 19-20. And then it continues to grow to 8.3 million in fiscal year 27-28. And in the chart you have in your admin report, we did the cumulative amount for those 10 years. So a cumulative cost to the city of 50.9 million.
Marnie, can you clarify that the orange bar is the city cost if we are to retain operations for ourselves based upon current, just projecting our costs? Is that what the orange bar is? We retain the fire department?
No, so that's if we transferred the fire services to the county. That would be the...
So there's no representation here of what our costs would be over the same 10 years if we retain the fire department as a comparison. So if we go to county, it's the orange bar, what our expenses are. The yellowish bar, unless my eyes are bad, which they are, is the county, but there's no representation of what our costs would be projected for the next 10 years for the fire department.
Not in this chart, but in the schedule that you have in your admin report, because it's part of the calculation. We do have a fire department budget numbered there. It starts at $22,104,854, and at the end of the 10 years, it's at like 33.1 million.
So Marty, I'm still confused. So the city is the city, but Eugene is saying now the orange bar is outsourcing.
No, the orange bar is the city's adjusted cost. I'm sorry, but I don't understand how we've got a city's adjusted cost that's projected out for 10 years, and I don't see any documentation anywhere that talks about the fact that this is how we arrived at that. I mean, somebody subtracted $5 million from what it costs to run the operation now, and suddenly we see a bar chart that says, and this is how that projects out. I don't get it. I'm very lost.
I still need to go back to the
So
basics.
the admin report walked us through that.
Okay. Let me do this. First of all, there are some assumptions that were made. You talked about assumptions. One of the assumptions is that we're going to project our costs against the county option B.
Yes.
Who made that assumption, and where's the rationale for it?
I just made that just because then we could compare apples to apples. When the report went to council and talking, not projecting it out, but just for the 1 year, the fire department had come up with an amount that if we were to talk apples to apples comparison with a reduced staffing level, how much we could take off from the fire department budget there, but we didn't project that out.
But everybody's calling this reduced staffing level.
Yes.
The most important thing in the universe is response, apparatus, personnel, and time. I have not seen anywhere in the city where there's been any discussion of why or how the county's optional proposal would be deficient in that way. And I don't think we can make that assumption without having some supporting documentation. So if I were contracting you to provide services at my house and you gave me an option A and option B, and you said, I'm going to give you everything that you need in order to take care of your house, I'm going to pick the cheap one, and then it becomes your problem for how you're going to do it. So I don't know why all of the comparisons go against comparable staffing, because I don't think comparable staffing is the correct measure. And like I said, I haven't seen anything contrary to that. The other thing, without getting into the weeds, and I swear I would not get into the weeds, but going through your numbers, let's all agree that we pay for our fire services out of the general fund. So ultimately,
Mostly.
all of those,
Harbor Patrol is not.
but it's a city expense, right?
Yes.
Okay, it's all a city expense. It all comes out of a pocket called the City of Redondo Beach. If you go back to your chart, at the bottom lower right-hand corner, it says if we give up our fire department, we've got $2 million, $2.19 million that we don't have to spend out of the city budget. But somehow that becomes an increased cost if we hire the county. I don't understand that. If the city doesn't have to spend that money on things like new fire trucks and new radios and new tires and all of those things, that means the city isn't spending that money. But if we
So
keep the
you're
fire
talking
department-
about the chart that was in the city council report, or your chart here?
Back up about 4 charts, I think it was. That one. See where it says eliminated costs?
Yes.
Hopefully I'm being naive in this and you're going to point out the error of my ways. But if those are costs that are eliminated from the cost of operating the fire department, then that means it's eliminated from the city spending that money, which means it's less money if we don't operate our own fire department.
So we took it from the other direction. So starting with getting rid of the entire fire department budget, and then we have to back in. So when we eliminate the total fire department budget, it includes these eliminated numbers. It includes this 2.2 million. But we don't get to eliminate the entire fire department budget. We still have to pay the
Retain.
nearly $3 million.
I get that. I mean, and that's a whole different conversation. I mean, when I look at the spreadsheet that was part of our packet,
Yes.
the last page of our spreadsheet, under things like workers' comp, ISF allocation.
Yes,
If people aren't working here for 10 years, and I think we can agree that the two highest risk pools that we have in the city are the police department and the fire department, right?
yes.
If we eliminate the fire department, how does that allocation for ISF claims go up over the 10-year period?
So we used the assumptions in the general fund financial forecast, which includes about a 3.5% increase, because it's also the risk management budget, or risk management function is included there as well as the claims. And we would continue also to get new claims during that 10 years of this illness or whatever that I now have is a result of when I worked at the city of Redondo Beach.
Right, but over time, those claims go down because there are fewer and fewer people that are going to make those claims, and they're further out. And if I'm looking at this chart correctly, this is assuming that these people are still on payroll for that 10 years.
No, not on payroll, but would have worked for the city currently.
Okay, but that group of people that would have worked for the city will be, some of them will be retiring out, some of them will be.
Well, even as retirees, the state presumption allows them to file a claim.
Okay.
But those are only for very specific illnesses.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
So
but common
that's-
ones.
Well, common, like cancer, for
Yes.
example. Okay, so what percentage of workers' compensation claims are presumptive illness cancer?
I have no idea. I'm not privy to
But
the
you- But you
individual
projected
claims.
it out.
Yes, I was told by the Human Resources Director that the claims would not be reduced.
We don't know what percentage of workers' compensation injuries are presumptive injuries for very specific illnesses like cancer.
Right.
But they've gone ahead and projected that over the course of 10 years, those numbers are going to continue to grow. So the data is not based on, there's an absence of demonstration of data there.
So things like workers' comp claims, we are going to have to go on assumptions. So we used the assumption that
Called incurred but not reported.
the amount that we have currently is not going to go away. And then we also used the assumption, as we did for all the internal service fund charges, that they would increase as they do in the general fund financial forecast.
Are we saying there's no end to the tail on the presumptive workers' comp claims?
That's my understanding, yeah.
And that 10 years from now, someone's going to file a cancer claim because of hazardous materials they encountered while being a firefighter in Redondo Beach?
Actually,
They
the thing that's
can.
more interesting is we're talking about the one person that would file the claim, but in the meantime, if we keep the fire department, we've got 10 years of, how many firefighters are there in the department? Total staffing is like 60 or 70 or something, or 80? In the meantime, we've got 80 firefighters that are on duty 24/7, that if we keep the fire department, some of them are going to get injured, and they're going to go out as IOD, which is workers' comp.
Yes,
If we don't have the fire department, they're not on payroll, so they don't get to file a workers' comp claim.
right.
And every new
Or
hire,
at least,
and
yeah.
every new hire, whatever presumptive injury they
they
have.
would be totally
would be on the
county.
county.
Yes.
And that was my question is, when you cease being an employee, how long is the tail for when you can file a workers' comp claim?
On presumptive injury, I don't believe there is one.
Yeah, for public
So-
safety, there is some
So
extremely long tail on that.
We don't have the
But-
information to
Yeah.
do anything with that line item.
I find.
I totally get the question. It's like, why doesn't it go away? And if you guys' answer is because the presumptive injuries don't
Well-
have a sunset.
Okay.
But,
How many people do we have off IOD on presumptive injuries right now?
I don't know.
So if we have none today,
I'm sure we don't have none.
this
but-
number is predominantly based on actual occurrences that happen on the job. So here's my point. There are flaws in this.
Well,
actually,
there are assumptions. I mean, we
Let-
don't have,
Let me go back to this, okay? If I understand this right, if the fire department moves, or if we contract with the county, in that far right-hand column where it says eliminated, does that mean the city does not spend those dollars?
Right.
Okay.
they're
so-
currently in the fire department budget. The
Okay.
fire department budget goes away, including these costs.
Okay. I'm not sure whether you've got it here, maybe I missed it, but one of the other things that you've got in the paperwork that we received is an item for fire department administration to the tune of $1 million.
Yes,
Is that
that-
included in that overhead number?
Yes,
Okay. So we don't spend $2 million if the fire department goes away, but we do spend it if it stays. And the other thing is, this is based on 1 year, and it doesn't talk about, I don't see anything here where it talks about if we keep the fire department, things like the vehicle replacement fund, we have to continue to fund that. And the radio replacement fund, we have to continue to fund that. So we've got these one-time numbers that come out, but it doesn't talk about the ongoing, come to think of it. One of the comments that you made is that the 3-year average for fire department cost increases is 4.48%, I think it was. Was it 3.48 or 4.48? 4.48, okay. When was the last time our fire personnel received a raise? Well, that's not really
I
important.
don't know that I
Okay,
know.
Okay. Well, the other part of that is, what proportion of the overall fire department budget would be, how much would the fire department budget be affected if we gave these guys raises? And what does that do over the next 10 years? Along with all the other benefits and all the other things that we're talking about here. I mean, I find this fundamentally flawed. And I understand that you were given a lot of assumptions from other departments. So we can't really be holding your feet to the fire on this. But there are some really gaping holes in this that need some real justification and answers. Not just somebody,
Added an escalation to a spreadsheet.
yeah.
You know, if we look at in 2018, if we don't have a fire department, we have $5.6 million of unavoidable costs. Yet 10 years later, if we don't have a fire department, we have $8.7 million of unavoidable costs. And so I guess ad infinitum, in 100 years,
Yeah.
we would have $100 million of unavoidable costs per year by not having a fire department.
Now, within that time period, the unfunded liability of PERS would go away.
But
It
that's-
doesn't go away in 10
that's
years, but in
half-
100 it would.
That's half of the amount. That's half of the amount, is the unfunded liability. And I guess that shows the tail on our, PERS.
Well, the unfunded liability sticks no matter what happens.
Yeah.
But the regular CalPERS, the normal CalPERS contribution is a function of payroll.
Yeah.
And,
But again, in 10 years, we've got $4 million of other costs. Well, we've got 1.8 million of workers' comp. I concur with questioning the fidelity in any way of that number. You can't project that. I mean, we need an expert to tell us. Otherwise, we're throwing darts at the wall and trying to,
And that's pretty much why we did a 3-year general fund forecast and not a 10-year. You're making wild assumptions and.
know, in any decision, whether to outsource the fire department or not, you need to know if you're going to be stuck with those costs over the long term. If that's a real cost, the $1.8 million in fiscal 27, 28, or if it's not, because, over 10 years, that's $20 million. We don't have $2 million to spend on workers' comp for employees we don't have 10 years from now. And we have no idea whether that's a real number or not.
and come to think of it, Marty, if I remember the workers' comp calculation, it's recalculated every year, and the unspent money is rolled over. So it's an incremental amount. It's not that we're budgeting $1.3 million a year for each of those years. That's not an annual expense.
Yes, it is to the fire department. They are charged an annual workers' comp internal service fund charge.
And they're charged the full $1.3 million every year.
Yes.
Well, what happens to the $1.3 million that they didn't spend last year because nobody got hurt?
So, first of all, that doesn't typically happen. That's a budget that it doesn't have any excess.
Isn't that part of the funds that get rolled forward every year, the unspent funds that get rolled forward?
No,
So it's, they get credit for the money they didn't spend, but
no, not here.
And so we can kind of, contemplate that workers' comp has a 10-year tail, or CalPERS does. But I just don't get the concept of, in 10 years from now, we're spending $600,000 on IT equipment that we don't use anymore,
yeah.
which is like the 8th line item
Which
down.
we are still. I mean, we still have a phone switch. We
So-
still,
I didn't mean to interrupt you, but come on. We've got an infrastructure that we're spending $600,000 a year on, and you're telling me that in 10 years, we're still going to have the same thing and we need to spend $600,000?
sure, because we're putting aside money for then the replacement of the current phone switch.
It doesn't-
We're always
doesn't-
putting money aside
But
for
it
its
won't-
And
next
it doesn't need to
replacement.
support a process that we don't have now.
Why are we setting
It
aside?
does. The phone switch benefits the whole city.
And we're,
It doesn't go away because some of the phone extensions tied to it go away.
so,
But then that's not tied specifically to the operation of the fire department. That's tied to the operation of the entire city.
Exactly. And so every department participates, I suppose you could say, in funding these replacements that benefit everybody.
But you wouldn't have to
Therefore,
replace those items that were within that equipment. So have you gone ahead and reduced the cost of that because you don't have it in that particular department any longer? I understand that
So
you
if you-
charge it because it affects the whole city, but you are also shedding responsibilities as well.
there are pieces of equipment that are not included in this number that we retain. But the majority of the cost is for the benefit of the whole city, and it'll just be redistributed to the other departments.
well, Mr. Chair, can I ask a baseline question here? given that we don't have the information or the fidelity or time to understand any single number on here, what is the end result of this? Are we going to ask ourselves to support or not support a recommendation to outsource the fire department or to look at it further? What are we doing here? Because we can't audit this $33 million a year cost by sitting here.
Yeah, we don't have sufficient information to, we don't have sufficient information to actually make a recommendation one way or the other, and it would be premature anyway, because part of these numbers and part of the assumptions are hopefully answers that we'll get back in the next round of the fire department study, which the city council has approved. Come to think of it, what's the status of that? Has the request gone to county fire yet
The MOU?
for phase two?
My understanding is the MOU with the county to do the Phase 2 is in the city attorney's office.
Okay, that's been there
And-
since,
And I don't know well, it took a long time for the county to send it to us. I don't know how long it's been there, but it certainly hasn't been the whole time since council voted to ask for it.
so I guess to finish answering your question, first of all, there are assumptions that have been made. Even with the county's second round, it's going to put a finer point on things like our conversion costs, but it's still not going to talk about our internal costs. And rightly so. The county has no business getting into the city of Redondo Beach and telling us how much we're going to save in all of our other departments if the fire department moves over. That's our job. I'm really unhappy with the assumptions. I'm really unhappy with these numbers because they are literally numbers that somebody put on a spreadsheet, and they are assumptions that somebody made with no justification, no supporting documentation, no comment, no nothing. And I just, even with our brief conversation here, I think we're looking at this and thinking that part of this is flawed. But that being said, I'll turn this over to Commissioner Henley, and let's see what he has to say.
Sure. So I have a couple points, and I would like to get into some of the details, but I'll start first with the big picture. My goal with tonight, and I did a lot of research in preparing for this meeting, so I could come informed, and I was at the city council meeting when they talked about it before. I think at this meeting, ultimately, you're going to have to make a decision with faulty data. The city is, because the contract is 10 years. So you're going to have to make projections, assumptions with the best data you have. When I look at this data, I think a lot of the assumptions are faulty, same as a lot of other people. And I'll get into that a little bit later. But tonight, we may not have to do anything specific. But if we can't come to a conclusion, I think we'd hold it over and figure out a way. But the first thing I wanted to say is I was a little disappointed that Chief Metzler isn't here, because he's the one that came up with a lot of these costs. And before this meeting, I was going to ask if he was going to be here, and I didn't, and I now regret that. And then also, if the other staff made the assumptions, then I think it would be helpful to have them here rather than, because we know that you don't have, the information, you didn't make up the assumptions, you just kind of gathered the information. So that's my first point. The next one is City Council, when they looked at option A for the county, the city's basic answer was if we wanted to reduce Redondo Beach's staff to match option A, we could do it 1.6 or roughly somewhere around there, $1 million cheaper than the county option. That's why they not discounted it, but whatever the assumptions they made here, they're going to make the same assumptions on option A, and that's their position, right or wrong. That's why they aren't looking at it. Because even if they wanted to go with the lower count, they would do it themselves, is what basically Chief Metzler said, as I understand it. The flawed assumptions I talked about. So, yeah, at the end of this, my ultimate goal at the end of this is I'd like to send something to City Council, and if at best we can say these are the assumptions we think are incorrect, or these are things that we highlight or things that should be asked more, we should give them some direction, because if we struggle with this, they're going to struggle with this, because they don't have the time to go into it in the depth that we do. So.
Sure.
That's where I think we should go with this.
Following on to your comment, it would be fairly standard in a projection of this magnitude that you would have a an accompaniment to this that would explain the escalation for each assumption. And I don't see that here. So pick one, pick all. Agree that perhaps a comment could be made that we need the support, the background for the escalations as part of this package. Somebody did it, and if they want to provide it and they said, I picked 9% a year, then we're going to say, that's not really good enough.
Well, like I said, it came from two primary places. The CalPERS valuations for the unfunded liability,
Right.
and then the general fund forecast, which put internal service fund charges increasing at approximately 3.5% a year.
Yeah. I mean, I remain having a fundamental problem with allocating costs to a department 10 years later that no longer exists. I mean,
And it's not allocating to the department. It's saying that these costs, because we don't have a fire department to allocate them to, they are going to be redistributed to the other departments of the other remaining departments of the city.
Well, how about talking about redistribution? If the fire department were to move over to the county, all of the IT equipment, all of the phone equipment that's in the fire stations right now, that's maintained by IT, that's under contracts that we can't get out from under and everything else, they could be redistributed to other departments rather than additional capital outlays.
You're going to have the same useful life. I mean, the equipment that the departments are using currently going to be no good the same time this would. I mean, it's not going to extend a life or anything like that.
But rather than purchasing new equipment to replace damaged equipment or to put in new services in another department, that equipment could be redeployed in the new department rather than a capital outlay or additional outlays. That's not included in here. I mean, this is how, now I'm getting into the weeds, and
But
I'm
there
sorry I wouldn't.
really
but-
isn't
But
equipment that it is so minimal.
there
You
certainly
have
is. It's $64,000 a year for equipment replacement. That's a ton of PCs.
that is not PCs. That is servers. That's network equipment. That's a phone switch. Those kind of things that are of a benefit to the whole city. And removing just the fire department would not make it so you didn't have to replace the phone switch at the end of its useful life.
Okay, well, I'm not going to continue to beat that horse. I will make one other comment, and that has to do on the revenue side. If you read the county proposal very carefully, that $400,000 that we couldn't figure out what to do with, and I think we kept it in the fire department?
Yes.
Okay. And then in the report that we received, it says, we didn't know what to do with this. If there was a determination against us, that the county would keep the $400,000. If you read the county proposal, it talks about revenues that we collect for things like ambulance service, for the advanced life support pass-through, insurance pass-through, that's ours, and whether we're
And we have made that assumption here in these numbers.
an adverse ruling for us or not, that money goes one of two places. It either comes to the city and we use it to offset the part of the cost of the county, or it goes straight to the county and they use it to reduce the costs of service to us.
And that's the assumption we've made in these numbers.
So, I don't know. Commissioner Solomon.
So it definitely seems to be a conclusion-based analysis. some of the things that I don't see here that I would have liked to have seen, and that are data that we have available, is for those non-presumptive injuries on work comp. So if we went to the county service on January 1st, all non-presumptive injuries, and we could look at what our past history was, and estimate for everything January 1st going forward, how much would we not be paying out in work comp injuries that are non-presumptive? For all of the staff people that because we're trying to hire, so for all of the staff people that would then be county employees, how much money are we saving in CalPERS contributions for those that we wouldn't be responsible for because they'd be on LaSera, which is something that's predictable. So it seems like we're focusing on those retained expenses, but I don't see anything here for those expenses that we're going to be freed of. You know, if you're bleeding, you cauterize a wound. So if
So those are taken in, the first number in the calculation is then the fire department budget. And so the first calculation is that is entirely eliminated, then we add back in these costs that the city retains, and then it's a lower amount that we're eliminating.
But you
But we're
didn't
still eliminating.
you know, the fire department budget doesn't include raises, as Commissioner Samples mentioned, which we're assuming that there will be 0 raises over the course of the period of time. The fire.
We're hoping not 10 years, but.
But that's where we are right now. And that the current fire department budget, not including or including expected hires, which would be something that CalPERS contributions for, that we're no longer going to be responsible for. So I think there are things in here
Well,
that.
we do, I mean, because the CalPERS costs are broken into 2 components. The normal cost, which is a percentage of payroll, and that's going to be for your newer employees.
For example.
This
I'm sorry, go ahead, Marnie.
And it'll be for new employees coming on. The unfunded liability is basically your legacy costs. It's costs that,
I mean, the unfunded liability is something that, forgive me, the staff likes to continue to bring up, and I realize, I get it, that unfunded liability is not going away.
right,
But for new hires, we're
Yes.
not going to take on that responsibility. We no longer have that responsibility.
right.
of
And
a
so
CalPERS contract.
that's in that normal cost amount that we are saying goes away with the fire
An
department
eliminated
budget.
costs, but.
Yes.
When we don't have those positions filled right now, but we'd be filling them for new employees. I'd like to see representation of how much that saves us by not having that there. So if we hired
It's the
5
fire
people
department
afterwards-
budget.
Okay, but the fire department budget, we're expecting is going up by 4.48% every year. That's with current staffing levels. That's not if we hire up.
So current staffing levels includes the number of budgeted positions. It's not taking a look at how many of those positions are filled.
And that includes your CalPERS liability?
Yeah.
Okay. So can you go back to the bar graph for a second, please? And I just want to go back to Commissioner Johnson's question and make sure that we're understanding this representation accurately. I'd like to make sure I understand it accurately. It says cities adjusted cost. This is a representation of what the city, if we retained the fire department, would be spending. Is that accurate? Can you describe what
No,
city adjusted
I
cost is
think
there?
what it is if you look at here, so, I don't understand what it means, but the orange bar appears to be 16 million, probably here.
Yes.
16,411,000.
Yes.
So
Based-
it's the 22 million we would have spent if we would have retained the fire department, less the 5 million, 5.6 million we can't avoid paying.
Yes.
What that number means, I don't know. And then, so then we're comparing that to what the county is going to charge us.
So just on its surface,
Okay, so now I'm starting to get it, but because the other part is, it ain't a fire department expense. We're charging the fire department $700,000 a year for IT costs that they're not using, essentially. We're charging them, that we're not avoiding. Now,
What bothers me, I suppose, or confuses me, is that we're mixing things here where we're not talking about the true cost of operating the fire department, just the fire department. What we're talking about is a cost to the city of the fire department's absorption of expenses that are distributed citywide, not just the true cost of what the fire department is.
I think
The opposite.
Eugenia, I think it's the opposite of that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is that we've taken the total costs, thank you, Marnie, and removed the costs that we can't avoid. So the orange bar represents only those costs, which are the variable costs of having a fire department.
yes.
But once again, the idea of them exponentially. You mentioned, Marnie, a little bit earlier that at the 10-year mark, our estimate of operating the fire department on our own was 33 million.
Yes.
So-
So that just takes the current budget and increases it each year by 4.48%.
So this analysis would tell us that even that, it's far more expensive to go with the county option B.
If you presume that this data is accurate. Which I think all agreed needs to be fleshed out a bit more. That the data seems to be flawed.
I think a big part of the problem that we have here is that we have staff, the fire chief sat here when he did the presentation to the city council, and he was asked, have you ever gone through this before? And his answer was no. I don't think we have anyone else in the city that's gone through this before in order to go through this analysis. And we don't have enough data. There are certainly a lot of things that need to be explored in order to get to the bottom of it. I don't think we're the right people to try to analyze it, but I also don't think that we've got the right resources being applied to this question right now. And
Well, I agree with Commissioner Hensley. It would have been nice if we had the chief here.
Yeah.
Or we had some of the other department heads here to explain these things.
And in all fairness, the chief is not the right guy to do the spreadsheet either.
Yeah.
So, and if he is, then, well, first of all, he has a conflict. And secondly.
His job depends on us staying.
And secondly, we're looking for that CPA on the city staff to audit to
You're going to get that one yet.
to validate the credibility of these presumptions, because, look at, well, I'm not going to look at the biggest number, but look at 2018, where we are retaining $5.7 million of costs on an annual basis. And, otherwise, it is the make or break on whether this analysis makes sense. So, if
I think there are two things that are the make or break. Number one, what's the real difference between option A and option B, other than the visible assumption that you can make by looking at the sheet that says they're going to take a fire truck out of service? So that, from an optics standpoint, it sounds like we're losing something, but somebody needs to ask the question, what are we losing? Are we really losing anything? What does this really mean? So that's one point, because the delta between option A and option B is $3 million, $4 million a year. So that's a big number by itself.
So I'm sorry, go ahead.
And the other part is, that's enough out of me.
Well, I'm going to have one more question, please, Marnie, and then I'll relinquish the microphone here. Part of what we've experienced a lot in the city is a dramatic increase of response calls. And when you look at what's proposed over at the Beach Cities Health District with an additional 420 living units that might be as many as 840 people, because sometimes you might have 2 people in a room. And what's going on over there at Nob Hill with the new assisted living location. Did we in the analysis discuss or look at what might be a requirement of increased number of personnel based on the trajectory of our increased need for response
And the Galleria.
and the gallery?
No, but I don't believe the county proposal did either. So that's why we picked the option B, which is similar to our current operations. So therefore, both pieces that we looked at
Well,
staying up at about the same levels.
because the county has other resources to backfill the need for response, the county wouldn't need to.
As do we with mutual aid, but
No, it's not the same.
So what you're saying is that we with mutual aid would not need additional personnel for the increase in responses that we're having?
no, I'm saying that it's no different than the county. County would have to make the same adjustments that we would.
So we wouldn't
So
have to
we're-
hire anybody else to respond to the additional housing that we're putting in?
I don't know, and I don't know, the county would have to look at that as well. So this just takes their proposal, which equates to our current staffing levels, and leaves it at that. It doesn't adjust either one for what might need to be increased staffing levels.
Okay.
Yeah. Commissioner Hensley?
Yep. I had a question. At the previous city council meeting, there was an assumption made in proposal B that there was a staffing reduction in the harbor because the county's proposal wasn't clear. Did we ever get any clarification on that?
I didn't.
Okay.
The county's proposal is actually quite clear. In it, in both of the options, it clearly identifies head count for the harbor. And if we're paying for it, they can't take it away.
Okay.
So the real difference between option A and option B is at Fire Station 2, the county proposes that right now there are 2 fire engines plus 1 rescue squad, and the county proposes to take one of those engines out of service. And the question is, do we actually get less service because of that? Because what's not taken into consideration is all of the county fire stations that are around North Redondo. And we don't know what that means. I have no idea what it means. I'm just suggesting that there is a significant difference between mutual aid, because mutual aid that we would call would be basically one of 2 agencies. We would either call LA County for mutual aid, or we would call El Segundo, because Torrance is at max capacity, and they, other than the most dire emergencies, they won't respond to rescue into our city, and that's been repeated many times by our fire department and others throughout the area, because they are at max capacity and they can't afford to do that. So for us to do mutual aid, I'm sorry, there's Manhattan Beach. So we've got Manhattan Beach, El Segundo, and the county are our 3 mutual aid partners. And the county itself has, other than Manhattan Beach Station 2, has the 3 nearest fire stations to Redondo Beach. Actually, the 5, because you got to include Palos Verdes. So I don't know what all that means, but we didn't take it into consideration. And we can't just make assumptions that because there's a fire truck that's not in a station, that means that we've got less service. Okay? There are too many missing pieces. And there are highly skilled professionals that do these analyses, and they can give us those answers. And rather than people within the city taking guesses at that, I think we should have more skilled support in making the decision. So, Commissioner Chun.
Mr. Hensley, I don't think was done.
One sec.
Just some clarification regarding the workers' comp. So assuming that it does go through county and Plan B, does that mean that all the new workers' comp claims is within the budget that the county is responsible, or we're still responsible?
Yeah, if they were never city employees, they could never file a workers' comp claim
But we're
against the
still on the
city.
hook? Okay,
Not for new ones.
No.
Right.
Not for new hires.
correct.
Or for people who transfer for claims that occur after the date
Right,
of the transfer.
right, okay. I think one of the challenges with this is there's a lot of policy involved where we don't have a lot of expertise, so that's the first thing. The second thing is all these ISF appears to be fixed costs, and that's the challenge that we're having. I wouldn't necessarily say it's errors, it's just challenging because trying to break down a certain part, although it's a big part of the budget, fire, with respect to a fixed cost that is citywide. That's the reason why it's so challenging. And that's the reason why we probably need further documentation or expertise in reviewing this. I think that's probably the biggest thing from a high level versus saying, I don't understand it. Well, we don't understand it because understanding a fixed cost of a road and how do you allocate all that, or a building to different parts of the city is very difficult, and that's what the challenge is. Is that pretty much correct, Marty, my assumption of what I'm saying?
I think so.
I think it makes sense. I agree, I understand.
Right.
Yeah, yeah. I think you're right. I'll make one observation in that. We spent a long time here this evening talking about internal controls and our internal audit and things that need to be implemented, and basically they kept circling back to, we need more staff in order to do this. In a year that the city council just elected to eliminate 6 staff, so that means more work goes on the people that are left. And we're talking about, in this case, these charges for the city, the personnel, whether it's in your department or the city clerk's office or wherever, those people would stay. If they weren't servicing our fire department, they might have more time to deal with the internal controls and policies and procedures and processes and things that we say are important to the city.
A little bit more time, yeah.
Yeah.
You know, say
So-
the fire department's, 10% of the employees,
Yeah, I
you
mean,
could
the point is-
theoretically say
the
that they have
point is-
10% more time.
Yeah, perhaps not the
Yes.
city treasurer, but certainly the HR department.
Certainly the HR department. So in any event, just an observation. Excuse me, Commissioner Nguyen.
Thanks, Chair.
So I'm just trying to get an understanding on timing now. So from my understanding, option A and B were presented to the city council. That was phase 1. Phase 2 is in the attorney's office. The city council is exploring option B further at this point, or they're exploring A and B. What's the current direction?
I don't really know. My guess would be both. And not till the, towards the end of the process would a decision be made which option to go with.
There's 2 phases to it. There's the first phase, which was contacting the county to see if they could send this proposal to us. And the second phase is for them to do a more itemized and detailed proposal to the city. And then I think that's what Marty mentioned is with the city attorney right now, is phase 2 of the study in order to kind of grind down the nitty-gritty and actually negotiate many of the items that are contained in the original analysis.
So basically, the process goes kind of like this. We sent a letter to the county that said, can you give us an idea of how much it would cost us if you were to take over our fire department? And we got back a preliminary proposal, and that's what we're dealing with here. It's pretty high level. It says, this is where we figure it'll be. A lot of things that are not included in this proposal and we can't analyze are things like they would take over our fire stations.
Yeah.
And lease our fire stations from us. Before they do that, they need to do a physical inspection of the fire station, make sure they don't have to do things like asbestos abatement or replace the roof or anything else. Otherwise, they allocate costs and they sit down with us and figure out who's going to do it, how much is it going to cost, and so forth. They go through all the apparatus, all the other equipment, and figure out the values on all of those things, and they give us a much more detailed proposal. It still doesn't address all of these internal charges that we're talking about. It's more detailed, and we have a better understanding of the conversion costs that would move over.
Yeah, it just sounds like we have a lot of moving parts, including what you brought up, more housing coming
Yeah.
online. It's
Yeah.
not addressed.
Yeah.
I'm with you. I think we need some type of high-level consultant that kind of has experience and really, I'm with you on that. I mean, we need a professional to kind of come in and do it right.
Professional help.
Yeah, professional help.
Are you done?
Yeah.
Okay, Commissioner Hensley.
Sure. Marnie, I'm sorry, I have a question, but I'm not sure if you'll know. What questions does the city still have for LA County moving into the next phase? What are our open questions for county?
I don't really know. I mean, I could look back at the admin report that went to council. It listed those out, but I don't know off the top of my head.
Well, even at the discussion, they had some more questions, or it seemed there's a lot of things, assumptions or things up in the air. So I just wonder, what is outstanding and what are we expecting to get answered in phase 2? And my second point.
Phase 2 really just refines the proposal.
But there is a discussion that happens. Is that correct or not correct?
Well.
Meaning you're allowed to ask questions, you're allowed to contact them, basically, if you
Gosh.
proceeded to phase 2.
If this were being handled properly, there would be ongoing conversations with the county right now to understand all of these assumptions. We've had this proposal in our hands for 4 months, and I'm still seeing assumptions that were made at the first presentation to our city council that I know are incorrect.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't disagree, and I'd like to make 2 points kind of as a wrap-up. So recently, or a few years ago, Hermosa went through this same process. So they had a feasibility study, they hired an expert, and then you can see after they implemented it, what are they actually paying? And I was not impressed by the expert report.
Right.
They didn't do a 10-year, they didn't even look 10 years out. They just basically everything was, we checked your number and it seems reasonable, was almost the answer every time. And if you looked at Hermosa's study, it was more expensive to go to county, but really what they avoided was replacing a $15 million firehouse that they get to pay over time to the county rather than having to front that cost. So I don't doubt theoretically that an expert could help, but unless there's other companies, I thought there was only one that does this kind of thing. It's not a very impressive report.
What's the name of
And
the company?
This one is Citygate Associates LLC, Fire and Emergency Service.
Yeah, there are a couple out there that have been doing this for years and years and years, and they know what they're doing.
Yeah.
But a big part of that is a problem that we have here in our city, and that is, how do we structure the contract? How do we put our criteria on that contract? What are their deliverables, and what are we looking for? The original letter that our city sent to the county asking for this proposal, most of the bullet items that we said we wanted answers on were, how much is this going to cost for retirement and how many firemen are you going to keep? Which is obviously not the question that we needed to be asking on the front end. And then there was frustration here in the city that we didn't get answers to those questions. I mean, that's not where you start one of these at. Setting the scope of work for a consultant and giving them access to this information, that's the key part to getting a good study back.
Yeah, and I think using this as an example, and even El Segundo, who looked at this, 9 years ago now, should help guide the city, but that's, their choice. The other thing I'd like to say is, I disagreed with a lot of the assumptions in here, and so just if everyone's going to make assumptions, I'm going to make my own. And even if you drive down the cost to basically just CalPERS left at 10 years, and you assume best case city cost increase and a worst, the most optimal for the city, it still financially doesn't look like it makes sense to go to county. So, and I'm not saying that's a decision, I'm just telling you what,
No.
anybody can play with spreadsheets, so.
Yeah, and that's my point.
I wanted to see at what point did it make sense? At what point did we start, having it cheaper to go to county? And I tried, lots of different ways, and I couldn't get there with the costs that we have, because they're fixed. Because you can't reallocate a building, you can't reallocate, other fixed costs. So, it makes it really difficult to do. So.
Some of those things are negotiable with the county, though. When
Yeah.
we talk about the maintenance and the insurance and those sorts of things, that's the sort of stuff you'll see in the phase 2 of the report.
Yeah,
Well,
and
in phase 1 of the report, the county says that they take over all routine maintenance of the facilities. That's
up to
included in their-
$50,000.
Well, it's routine maintenance.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's all the grounds maintenance, it's all the basic painting and all those things.
So,
that doesn't-
so to
Yeah,
follow
so-
on that exact point, one of our big problems right now is we need a new police station, right?
Very much so.
What, how long till we need $35 million for each new firehouse, or $50 million?
We probably should have, at least Fire Station 1 should probably be replaced.
Right.
It's
But
the same
that will be
age
billed to
as
us
the-
by the county, so there's no cost savings it's in the study. It says if we need to replace something big, we're coming back to you. If you have a huge increase in population, we're coming back to you. This only matches your current population.
And
We don't know that, because once again, that question wasn't asked of the county, it's an assumption.
That was in the study, what the things were, so.
No, it just says how many people. It doesn't say at what point do they charge us for having more people.
I do agree, though, that, anyone could come up with their own assumptions for the spreadsheet, and it's difficult to see the crossover point at which point it becomes neutral or cost advantageous. So, having a shared service, is it as good, is it better? People can debate that all they want, but from the point of view of, oh my gosh, we've got a budget problem, can we save $3 or $5 million a year? I think the answer is no. And if, it's a different question, and it's not our question, if we save $1 million a year, which it doesn't look like we will, would we want to do it? And then many people would say no. So I think maybe an observation is that we're in the middle of this. It's not looking like there's anything convincing at this point. We need to keep a sharp eye on it. And if anybody has recommendations to staff or council to sharpen up those projections, maybe we could make that as something that would be a valuable input, that, hey, we're looking at this, and we're not seeing the fidelity of the information behind the assumptions. Can we recommend that should be supported?
I think that's all we can do, because as much as it may sound that I'm trying to defend the county, what I'm really trying to point out is we have insufficient information.
Yeah, I agree.
I don't know, and this is my business, I don't know which of these works. I have no idea if there is a crossover or not, if there's a savings or not. And it's interesting, because I was at one of the council community meetings a few weeks ago, and it was interesting that there were people in the audience that said that they would be more than happy to pay more in taxes to the city if we keep our fire department. Now, the police department was there and suggested that it was unfair that the police department hasn't gotten a raise in a few years, and there was not a peep about, let's collect more taxes and pay the police more money. But the people want the fire department to stay here. So I guess the important thing is, how do we work it out so that it actually happens and it works? I'm actually one of those people that believes that what's more important to me than the name on the side of the fire truck is the service that I get, right? If it's exactly the same amount for our fire department and county fire, and one provides better service than the other, that's the important part.
And I think, this is a important question that bears looking into, and I agree with you, and certainly regardless if we stay with the fire department we have our opportunity to hold them accountable and to stop having the paramedic with a $95,000 salary being paid $450,000 a year. And I'm,
That brings up, thank you for bringing that up, is a question that I forgot to ask is, in the assumptions that we have in comparison, how did we factor that cap X of overtime that we wouldn't be responsible for once the county takes over?
Well, overtime is part of the fire department budget, that's our starting point, is the fire department budget goes away.
But we
And-
don't know how much the overtime's going to be year over year.
So
it's projected.
So our
added
estimate-
Item in the base number.
our estimate has been that the fire department budget goes up 4.48%. That includes overtime.
Okay, so when you have a situation where we do have increases in response, you're likely to have more overtime? Or you're saying that mutual aid would kick in and we wouldn't have more overtime?
I'm just saying that it hasn't been calculated into these numbers at all on the city side or the county side. It simply looks at current staffing
And
levels.
this, okay, and that's a big issue with the MOUs and things like that. I know that's a contention too. Okay,
The county has a little different way of doing it. There's a difference between full staffing and constant manning. Our fire department operates under constant manning, which means that it takes 3 firemen to run a fire truck, and therefore there are 3 firemen on duty every day. Whether it's overtime or straight time, there are 3 firemen there. In order to run a 3-man engine company 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, you would think that, well, that's 3 people times 3 shifts, that takes 9 people. It actually takes 12. You have to have 12 full-time employees in order to cover all of the time off and IOD injuries and training and all the other things that it takes. So county fire actually has more people than they have seats that are on the road every day in order to fill in the vacancies, and we don't. We're running at the slimmest of manning, and it's a comment that I made to the fire chief. That works from a financial standpoint. The overtime that we pay the firemen just about nets out with the cost of hiring a new fireman. But where it breaks down is when you work your personnel too many days of overtime in a day or a week or a month for 6 months or a year at a time, you tend to get more IOD injuries.
Yeah,
And that's where the whole system breaks down.
And I think that this may not be well received. The level of activity for the Redondo Beach Fire Department is very low. And here it comes. I'm not in favor of paying someone $450,000 a year to sleep at the fire station.
They actually have a fairly high call load.
365 days a year. Well, I mean, I think. and
I mean, yes.
You had mentioned that it was Sleepy Hollow or something. So I think this is very much a work in progress. And we seem to have some strong feelings about the lack of fidelity in the projections in this spreadsheet. So we can either receive and file, or we can at least make the recommendation that we need to see so that we can further look at it, we need to see the assumptions behind the projections in the spreadsheet. So I therefore would offer a motion that this spreadsheet by which we're projecting the costs, both mostly it's the remaining costs. We would like to see the assumptions behind the escalations and projections as these go on over the 10-year period.
Well, they are, because almost this whole list is internal service fund charges. Those are increasing at 3.5%, according to the general fund financial forecast.
Those
The
places-
CalPERS comes from, it's mentioned in here, the percentage that the fire department pays of the city's CalPERS costs. It assumes that same percentage using the
Marty,
CalPERS.
I hear you, and it's possible that, yes, we have it and we just don't like it.
Yeah, I just don't see
I hear what you're saying.
what
And it-
additional could be provided.
Let me try to see if we can accept your comments then. So, Let's look at FY '18. So the biggest number is CalPERS, and that's coming from a well-trusted source. The next biggest number is workers' comp, the 1.371 million, and
Basically, you're saying there, sorry, that those are presumptive injuries and not actual injuries, or you're saying it's a combination of both? That would be something that I like to be able to
It's a
dig down on.
combination of both.
Okay,
It's their portion of our workers' comp.
so it'd be really good to get a
Costs.
breakdown there of what is presumptive and what's non-presumptive.
I would assume that that's confidential information.
Well, the numbers shouldn't be
Well,
confidential.
we're not asking for specific individuals or HIPAA violations. We're asking what percentage of work comp claims in the city are due to presumptive injury versus on-the-job injury from other than presumptive.
how about this, Eugene? Can we get, and I'm going to hold that thought for half a second. So that's the next one we want. Everything else on this spreadsheet is simply escalated at the 3% a year.
Yeah, so starting at liability insurance claims,
Yep.
all the way down through overhead fire administration.
Got it. So we're, on the surface, willing to accept the CalPERS number. We say, okay, yeah, we get it, we don't like it, but the other stuff's just escalated at 3% a year based on the actuals, and we don't have a good intuitive understanding of, or there are some more questions on this workers' comp allocation. So is there, you're the insurance man here, can we frame a question that we want on that, or are we just accepting that?
I think a better way to put it is on certain items, let's just take an example. IT equipment, maintenance, ISF, $462,000. If we could see what the bigger picture is overall for that, for IT citywide, and how much of that is with the fire department, that would give us a lot more clarity in terms of understanding that number, as an example.
So Warren, are you saying how many PCs are in the firehouses?
No, not how many PCs, but, okay, of that $462,000, what is it, essentially, right? And then,
So the maintenance number?
yeah, that's just an example.
So that is the Information Technology Department's budget.
The total
And
budget.
spread over the city, and this is the fire department's portion.
And how's it spread? Is it based upon the total cost of the operating the department, or what's?
Number of computers and phones.
So as an example, this 462,000, what's the total city's budget for that IT maintenance and equipment? Is it 2 million, 5 million? I mean,
So we had that back when we did our last update for the internal service fund costs. We'll have that again when we do it again at mid-year, but
So Marty, can you
I don't have it with me here.
clarify the allocation is the number of computers and phones in the firehouses?
That's how the IT budget is divided up among the departments, is based on the number of computers and phones.
I mean, there can't be that many computers in the firehouses
The-
relative to everywhere else in the city.
So I guess budget for your department is probably, your ISF allocation for IT is probably what, about $30 million? Because there are
No.
4 of you in your department? I just,
I mean, how many
No,
phones
we
are there?
are a very
the
small
firehouse?
percentage of the city.
oh, there are probably 4 or 5 phones in a fire station, but, and
Well-
maybe even 4 or 5 PCs.
Yeah.
so maybe,
100,000.
so
per
let's
seat
stick on this, right? So
Pretty good.
I'm looking at our budget, 2019-20, it says IT total is 3.4 million. The ISF for IT is 466,000. So how does that compare with this 462,000?
So those are, if you're looking at, excuse me, the Information Technology Department's
Right.
budget, and you're looking at their expense for internal service fund charges. That's how much they're paying for,
Oh, just
you know,
them.
financial services assistance, human resources assistance. And of course, they have computers and phones, so they bill themselves as well.
Essentially, it would be, the 462,000 is out of the 3.3 million then.
So if you have the whole budget document, in the expenditures section, there's a two-page facing spreadsheet of internal service fund charges
Okay?
and broken down, but
So
I don't have it with
Warren,
me.
the way I look at this is that, like, you take the allocation of ISF for the city treasurer. City treasurer is spending 0% of their time worrying about the fire department, and we're making, so those costs are what they are, and we're making an allocation, and that number ends up here. And so for the IT, I'm going on the presumption that there's, you pointed out, because you have the experience, there's very few telephones and computers in a firehouse, so we're not going to cut our service costs or our hardware costs very much. So all this money's getting spent somewhere else in the city, and boom, we're just making an allocation to the fire service and making them pay for it. So yes, in most of these cases, those dollars aren't going anywhere. I would, state that, yeah, we're going to, put in 400 hours less a year of one person's time in HR. But for the most part, these costs aren't going anywhere, and we've just been allocating them. And so we're escalating them at 3% a year.
Right.
So I'm kind of accepting that.
Yeah, all the department overhead numbers, I think they are what they are, and they stay in the city because we're probably not going to cut head count just because the fire department goes away. So those numbers stay. But I still go back to the lower right-hand corner where the city doesn't spend $2.19 million, and somehow it's made to look like that increases the cost of the county plan. I don't understand the math on that.
No, it's part of the whole fire department budget that goes away if you went to county fire. Then you have to, then what we're saying is no, that whole budget doesn't go away. Some of it's redistributed to other departments.
Can we flip back to that chart?
Yeah.
Real quick, because I think, share samples.
That one?
That we have these, where's
Okay.
the big bomber? So we don't break out the ISFs here.
Well, this is the ISFs. We don't have.
Okay, it's exactly where it is. So the 461,997 is the retained amount. And exactly that point, information technology maintenance, we're only cutting $22,000 a year.
Right.
For the
Yeah.
few PCs and the servicing of those sitting in the firehouses. The retained cost that we've been allocating to the fire services is $461,997, which is right here.
Yeah.
So that cost ain't going away because
Right.
it's not actually being incurred in the firehouses. So I totally get that. And in fact, now we can trace these numbers now that we spent the
But can
time.
you help me with this? If we have the fire department,
Yeah.
we write a check for $5,168,000 a year,
Yeah,
okay? If we don't have the fire department, we write a check for $2,972,000,
yep.
okay?
And I think I can help you there because you see any one of those that you can track. And again, I'm going to point at the 461,997. That appears in the retained cost, so we still pay that. And you don't see the 22,000 anyplace.
Well, but that's what I'm talking about, is the three numbers on the very bottom of that.
Yeah.
Okay, we write a check, cash comes out of the general fund, $5 million a year if we have our own fire department.
Yeah.
Okay, if we don't have our own fire department, that number goes down by roughly
195.
$2.2 million a
Right.
year. And then the county says that that it's going to cost $18 million a year. Why would we not subtract $2.19 million from the 18 million to figure out what it actually costs to operate county fire?
So we could do it the opposite way. We could add, instead of subtracting from the city fire department budget, the costs that are retained, we could add to the county proposal the retained amounts, and use the full fire department budget in comparison then to this added cost to the county proposal, and make our comparison and come up with the same number.
I think their number should be the number they give us on the contract and we're going to pay, and we shouldn't be adjusting it for retained costs.
But I think that's where I'm going with this. Somehow I'm thinking about this backwards, because I look at this like the city is writing a check. And if we write a check that's $2.1 million less than the check we wrote last year, we're not paying as much money. So if you take the entire fire department budget, the $22 million number, we wrote a check this year for $22 million, or last year for $22 million. And next year, we write a check for 22 million, or for 18 million for the county, plus, whatever that is. Well, okay, I guess I'm working myself back into it in the direction you guys are in. Okay, good.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
The 2.195, I'm confident, is
Yeah.
not being counted.
Yeah, yeah.
So, Eugene, do you have a motion you need to make in regards to the workers' comp? Some clarification here?
Yeah, I don't think that we would be revealing any confidential information on anyone specifically. If we could break down the percentage, if you didn't want to give an exact number, of what the actual was of presumptive injury versus other than presumptive, and what percentage of that cost is loss adjustment expense.
And by the way, now that we all understand the math and the ins and outs of these a little better, for the 2019-2020 budget and this is the internal service fund allocation for workers' compensation insurance to the fire department is $1,452,000. And we're saying, that's for all workers' comp.
For the fire department. Our total work comp for the city was about 2.2 million, give or take.
It's funny that most of it goes to fire. You think there's equal in police, but they have more employees. But let's not try to audit that. So now I'm going to get back to our first fundamental question. I don't believe that out of the $1.4 million, that $1.3 million is presumptive, because there's guys getting hurt.
Right. Doesn't seem logical to me.
No, and that we're only retaining $81,000, and that, fine, if you buy that, I don't buy it after the 10-year mark.
It would be a disappearing limit, in part anyway.
Because there's real injuries that people are filing. That's not the correct way of saying it. There are injuries on the job that are not presumptive.
Right.
Oh, I've got arthritis in my thumb, right? That's presumptive.
No, these are guys that.
Bang, my
fall
hand
down.
got, yes.
They fall down, they break an arm.
Yes.
Equipment falls on them.
Right.
Yes.
And I,
Bad stuff happens.
Presumptive injuries are very specific.
yeah, and are we making, intuitively, we're not, if the 1.371 represents presumptive injuries, then we don't understand that. So do we, so we have to ask a question, right? Because we could give them a list of things we guess it might be, but I think our question is, we're not understanding the retained portion of the workers' comp insurance.
So it's not only the claims that can still be filed after, that's a huge portion of it, but it also is how long it takes to settle workers' comp claims.
But we're going from
That's the loss adjustment expense.
1.3 million to 1, you're an insurance man.
It should- it would-
I audited insurance at Arthur Anderson for 5 years. Tails go down.
It wouldn't be an escalating number.
Tails go down. So,
Over a period, you mentioned in the presentation that the typical claim lasts 5 years.
right.
So then the loss adjustment expense and then the incurred but not reported and the actual claim itself would all, other than presumptive injuries, tend to reduce rather than expand over a 10-year period.
So,
But as you have pointed out here, so say we took in the 10th year and said there were no workers' comp claims left. So we take out 1.8 million. We were looking at an increased cost to the city of 8.3 million. So, you know, we're still at 6 million of additional costs.
you're correct that it doesn't change the analysis.
Right.
But it doesn't mean that we should accept a number that on the surface we feel is illogical.
Right.
So I think if we have a question, it's that we don't understand the lack of a diminishing cost on the workers' comp over the entire 10-year period.
And perhaps a breakdown of what that number represents.
And I agree that I don't see any confidentiality in determining what is an ongoing workers' comp claim and what is the presumptive portion of that for which there is no cutoff period for which you can make a claim.
Certainly one thing that Assistant City Manager Wazanski constantly brings up to us is the idea that one thing that's never going down is the cost of the lawyers and the cost of medical care.
And I don't even think that that's a motion. I think that's just a question for staff to give us more information on next time.
We've got other numbers up there that are worthy of, if we are going to ask a question, and I don't think it's the appropriate time now. I think we need to continue to monitor this, and we need to deal with it once Phase 2 is underway, and it will probably take at least several weeks once the agreements are done before the county will even come here and do their audit and prepare their materials. So we've got some time, but
Hopefully a final comment.
this is my final comment. We've got things like the vehicle equipment replacement fund. It shows a one-time reduction, and what we know is on an annual basis, there's a set aside for vehicle replacement. It's not reflected anywhere else.
Yes, so we're saying that for every year in this projection, that part of the fire department budget is eliminated.
Yeah, there's no going forward cost.
Right.
That zero carries
It
forward.
doesn't get added back on as a retained cost in the future years.
That dash
It's out of there for the whole time.
Dash appears every
Okay.
year in the 10-year projection.
Okay. All right, I'm done. Commissioner Henley.
Yes, I was been staring at this chart, listening to the conversation, and I'd like to just confirm my understanding. So let's go to, if we could, want to review this. So if we all agree that the 1920 numbers are as they are, right? These are the costs today, and there's really no assumption in that, right? These are what's budgeted. And then the other thing is county option B's projected cost for 1920 is 20.138 million, right? So that we're in agreement on. Let's go out to 2728, right? And let's assume in that year that every other cost except CalPERS has gone to zero for the fires. You still have $4.6 million of CalPERS costs, okay? And the fire department budget, assuming 4.48% a year, is 33.18 million. And the fire cost for option B is 32.8 million. But you have to subtract the 4.6 CalPERS cost from our money, because we'd still pay that even if we went to county, even if that was the only cost remaining.
Right?
And county would still be 32 million. So that means let me say that again.
Sorry.
Fire department costs $33.2 million. Subtract the CalPERS cost, which we agree with because it's from the table, of $4.6 million. That means the city's adjusted cost in 27-28 would be 28.5 million.
Okay.
And the county cost is 32.8.
Were the assumptions for the increases in the county contract part of their analysis, or was that something projected by the staff?
No, it's in the
5.5% for the first 5 years, right?
Yeah.
Right, and then they talk
almost
about,
7%.
then they'll analyze actual costs, you know, no way to do that, so we just assume it's the cap, and then, so they take the average of the, I forget how many prior years, and add 1%.
So that was a
So
staff assumption.
It's using the formula they had, but the only assumption could make without any history to it is that the actual costs that they're reconciling to match.
Were we
The
able to
caps,
do any
'cause-
peer review of what the increases have been for other cities over the course of years?
So I can, at least in Hermosa, when I looked at it, they had 5.5 in their study, and they negotiated down to 4% per year. But that was as far as they got. And they negotiated from 5.9 million to 5.8 million, very small savings in their negotiated cost. And I don't disagree that the cost assumptions are high for the county going up, especially after year 5. But also the city's cost of 4.5% is high. Because if you look at the last 10 years of the city cost for fire department, it's only gone up 3% a year. And I know there was a big recession in there, and that's a lot of it, but that's the data that exists, right? So I think the city's cost is high and the county's costs are high, but at the end of 10 years, we're still $4 million away from, you know,
From this making sense.
from this making sense. So even if everything else went to zero, every other number could be way off, and let's call it zero in year 10. The CalPERS alone is gonna make it cost prohibitive to switch. And I think the reason that the math is a little difficult, or why don't we save that, $2 million, is what the county is charging us seems to be pretty expensive for no overhead cost of service for really just personnel and maintenance. Right? They don't have to pay for all these structural costs that remain, all these overheads and everything that remain that we have to keep paying. So that tells me that it seems expensive, even though it looks like a quote-unquote savings when you see just the numbers.
And I think that, sometime at some point in the future, we're going to be asked to do a $10 million upgrade to a firehouse that it's going to be a cost that's not shown on this schedule. But,
Well, I think there's a lot of CapEx, if you go or you don't go.
so in the midst of all this, I'm going to be really bold and make a move to receive and file the report.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay.
No. I'm voting against that.
What's your recommendation?
I do not vote to receive and file this report when we have questions about these numbers. I think we need to go back. We should not receive and file this report until we get clarification on the numbers that we've asked for.
Well, I don't think receive and file means agree, does it?
No.
No.
I don't want to file a report that I have questions about numbers for. Become part of the record. I'd like to have it amended after we receive the additional information. It's okay. I don't have to agree.
Okay.
We have taken a vote, so, but I hear your dissent, and it's well taken. Commissioner Henley,
Yeah.
and
So,
then we need to move on.
okay. Just to confirm, receive and file doesn't mean close the topic. Is that
Correct.
correct?
Yep.
So and you can still make a second motion after receive and file. Receive and file just means receive and
Thank you-
file.
thank you for the
Thank you for
report.
the report.
Yes.
So, okay,
No, I didn't want to go on the ground.
so after we have received and filed the report, could I make a motion to postpone this topic until the next Budget and Finance Committee meeting and ask for those underlying data and assumptions and the staff responsible for those assumptions here to answer the questions?
The next item on the agenda is member items and referrals to staff for budget and finance. So if we've got specific requests and we agree, then they're referrals to staff, and we can ask them to come back to us with additional information.
Okay.
So we are now on that topic item. Member items. Does anyone have any referrals to staff?
I just have one, and it's just really just to see the paperwork. When we issued that bond for the refinancing, I'd just like to see the official document. Don't need a discussion or anything, but if we could just all receive
For the
that.
Fisherman's Cove lease,
For the,
for the leases in the harbor?
no, the bond that was, the issuance of the bond that, I forgot how much it was, the actual document.
I don't recall the dollar amount either. Are you just would like to see the official statement? Or,
Yes.
I mean, there's tons of bond documents, but.
Yeah, well, it's just the final document, the official I forgot the correct terminology, the official statement.
Okay, if I just email it?
Yeah, just email it, everyone is fine. That's all we'd like.
Okay. Anything else?
Yes, I have one. At last month's meeting, there was a lady who got up here and spoke from, I think, RPV or one of the neighboring cities, talking about CalPERS costs. And she had some packet of information. And in that packet of information was third parties that help cities with CalPERS costs and other things. So I would like to, I don't have a date, maybe that's a discussion item, but I'd like to bring that up as a discussion of CalPERS cost and considering third-party engagement to either understand the cost better or potential mitigation of future costs.
And I believe we try and provide that in the budget response report that we do each year on CalPERS.
The two companies that the lady had mentioned was GovInvest, and it's, instead of accepting CalPERS assumptions and CalPERS.
That's very expensive.
Well, I found at least a dozen other cities that are using it. So I
Yeah,
don't know
but
that it's
we've
useful.
gotten a proposal before, and it was just too expensive.
Okay.
We did have a representative from CalPERS here last year, and he went through the assumptions and the numbers. Very much left the door open that the city can go back to CalPERS at any time with our new assumptions. So whether it's moving the fire department out or hiring more policemen or salary raises, whatever it is, and they'll recast all the numbers for us on a year-by-year basis. So we've got that option open. But I believe all of the companies that do this consulting, they charge a fee, and it can be very expensive.
Yeah, of course, and I don't know if it's useful or any good, and but CalPERS isn't going away, and not doing anything about it is just,
Well, and that's the fundamental problem. You have to do something about it, which is basically find a way to move your personnel off of CalPERS.
Yeah,
And our budget response report does address that. We implemented a tier 2, where employees hired after a certain date, although PEPRA hadn't been implemented yet, they have reduced benefits and they have to share in more of their costs and whatnot. In addition, as each MOU is negotiated, employees are paying a portion of their PERS, and then of course there's the one we didn't have a choice about, but still implemented PEPRA employees that are more recently hired.
yes, I'm familiar with the changes. That's fine if we don't want to, that's fine. If it doesn't get a second, that's fine.
I don't want to slam the door on anything like that because I think it's always worth exploring and re-exploring and investigating. I don't think now is exactly the right time for it. Okay. Anything else? Nothing. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
so moved.
Second.
All those in favor? Aye. Sounds unanimous this time. Is it unanimous this
Bang
time?
the gavel.
Bang the gavel.
You don't get to do that very often. You have to take advantage of it.